Hey everyone, this is Continuing Education. I'm Minister James Moss. We're back with another video in the book of Luke, chapter 18, and we're going to cover verses 9 through 14. This one is entitled, Jesus Tells the Parable of Two Men Who Prayed. Okay. All right. So here we go. After encouraging the disciples to be persistent in prayer, Jesus taught them with a parable how to pray. This parable sharply contrasts the prayer of a Pharisee with that of a tax collector. All right. So let's see here. Okay. Verses 9 through 14. All right. And I think I had that covered. Yeah, I have that marked off. All right. So let's go. And he spake this parable unto certain which trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Two men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee and the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself. God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. I fast twice in the week, I give tithes of all that I possess, and the publican standing afar off would not lift up so much as his eyes unto heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone that exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. All right, and we've learned that before too, where this is not the first time Jesus talked about self-exaltations. Okay, so here we go. Verses 9 and 10. Prayer is important, but the attitude of prayer is vitally important. Okay, so prayer is important, but the attitude of prayer is vitally important. Okay, we'll go with that. The people who had suffered, or the people who had great self-confidence and scorned everyone were the Pharisees and the other religious leaders who saw themselves as the only ones righteous enough to be acceptable to God. To these people, Jesus told a story about two men who went to the temple to pray. These two men were as different as could be. The one was a law-keeping and religious Pharisee, and the other was a dishonest tax collector. Verses 11 and 12. Now, it just said he was a publican. I mean, he might have been dishonest because that was the reputation of tax collectors. But there was nothing that specifically said that he was dishonest. He just said, Lord, he couldn't even look to heaven. He just said, I am a sinner. You know, he confessed his sins and repented. So again, when you read commentaries, man, watch what they say, because sometimes they throw little things in there that's like, okay, you guys are taking a little bit of liberty here. Let's just stick to the word. All right. So anyway, there was nothing saying that he was a dishonest tax collector, and not every tax collector was dishonest either. There were plenty that were, because they gave what do I want to say? They gave the occupation a bad name, but not all of them were dishonest. Okay, but there were enough of them to make sure that people didn't trust everybody, didn't trust all the tax collectors. All right, verses 11 and 12. This Pharisee's action and his prayer provided a picture of his life and occupation. He was a separatist, but the separatism and desire to remain clean before God had hardened into a lifestyle of self-righteousness. He stood by himself and prayed. The words of this prayer, however, while probably true, were not prayed in the correct attitude of humility before God. He thanked God that he was not a sinner like everyone else. While the Pharisee was probably not like everyone else in a lot of ways, he erred in thinking that he was not a sinner. This Pharisee knew that he was far better than the tax collector he saw praying across the way. Tax collectors were not noted for their honesty, so this Pharisee compared himself favorably, telling God that he himself had never cheated or sinned or committed adultery. And by the way, he also fasted twice a week and tithed from his income. This Pharisee was confident of himself and his righteousness, while at the same time despising this other man, even though he too was in the temple praying to the same God. The Pharisee did not welcome the tax collector, who may have been seeking God. Instead, the Pharisee gloated that he was so much more righteous. Verses 13 and 14, the focus shifts to the tax collector, who had come to the temple and seems to have known full well the extent of his sin. He felt so low that he did not think he could even lift his eyes to heaven and into God's face. Instead, he beat his chest, which is basically a sign of sorrow, praying for God to be merciful to him. He recognized himself as being a sinner. He had been convicted of his sin and had come to the one place where he could find forgiveness. He had come to God humbly, recognizing that he did not deserve mercy. Surprisingly enough, only the tax collector returned home justified before God. The word justified means God's act of declaring people not guilty of sin. Only the tax collector recognized his sin. Therefore, he was the only one God justified. This self-righteous Pharisee had said that he had no sin. Therefore, there was nothing for God to justify for him. He returned home no different than when he had entered. The principle is that no one has anything of value to bring to God in order to deserve salvation, mercy, justice, or justification, or even a second glance from God. The proud will be humbled, but the humble will be honored. Acceptance before God cannot be achieved by good deeds or piety or any amount of self-proclaimed high righteousness or self-righteousness. It's through the grace of God. All right, so I'm glad that you got a chance, if you're watching this video, that you're here with me, and the fact that we're at this point, you watch this video. I truly hope that you see the difference between the two men that were praying and see what Jesus was conveying and how what the attitude should be when we go to God in prayer. All right. So until next time, God bless you. God keep you, and thank you for supporting this ministry and all that we do. And until next time, remember, keep studying.